The king did not know that in his greatest love would also be his ruination, nor would either would come in the form of a tiny, helpless child. She was a lone flutter of life in an endless expense of decay, the only living mortal for hundreds of miles. The child was perhaps 4, perhaps 8. It was hard to tell, because she was so small, even in human standards, just a fragile little creature with slick black hair that curtained her wide gray eyes. Somewhere buried beneath the charred beams and crumbled stones, the girl's family likely lay, crushed beyond recognition. Nor perhaps their ravaged bodies had been left out in the night, taken perhaps, just like the ones that stalked the child now, looking down at her, with the interest that a hawk afforded rabbit. The humans, of course, were nothing more than that in this world. Prey, pests, or often both. The winged men before her, smiling at their luck. Immediately the girl struggled against the debris that pinned her. She recognized what they were, recognized with their pointed teeth, black featherless wings, and perhaps even recognized the uniform they wore, the deep purple of the high-eyed night-born king, and perhaps the men that had burned her home had wore uniforms just like these. But she could not run. Her clothing was torn and helplessly torn in runes around her. She was so small to shift the stones. "Look at this little lamb," the man approached. As one of them reached out for her, she snarled at him, catching his finger, the tips before the small blunt teeth. The soldier hissed as he yanked his hand away, while his companions laughed. "A little lamb, more like a viper." "Or a garden snake," the other scoffed. The bitten soldier rubbed his hand, wiping away a few droplets of crimson blood. He started for the child. "Doesn't matter," and grumbled. "They taste the same. And I don't know about you bastards, but I'm hungry after such a long night." But then, in the shadow fell over them, the man smiled. They lowered his head to a reverent bows. The cold air shivered, the darkness twisting over their faces, and wings like a blade caressing a throat. The high-eyed king did not utter a single word. He did not need to. The moment he made his presence known, all the warriors fell into silence. He was not physically the strongest vampire. He was not the fiercest warrior, nor the wisest sage, but they were said he was blessed by the goddess Anixe herself, and anyone who had ever met him would swear it to be true. Power seeped from his every pore, and death stained every breath. His soldier said nothing. He had stopped over the wreckage of the little house. "Rizhand has been evicted from this area, and the rest of our men have traveled north." The king lifted his head, and the warriors went quiet, and he knelt before the little girl, who glowered at him. So young, he thought. Her life merely handfuls. Nothing compared to centuries of existence, and yet she drew up such an intense hatred as she glowered at him, her eyes as bright and silver as the moon. She was found here," the king asked. "Yes, sire." "Is she the reason the blood is on your hands?" A wave of poorly suppressed snickers from the other soldiers. "Yes, sire." The answer was slightly bashful. They thought he was mocking him. "No. This had nothing to do with him." He reached for the girl. She snapped at him. He let her bite and did not move his hand, even as her teeth, tiny as they were, sunk deep into his bony index finger. She looked straight him in the eye, unblinking. He returned to that stare with a mounting interest. This was not the stare of a panicked child who didn't know what she was doing. This was the stare of a creature who understood confronting death itself and still chose to spit in his face. "A little serpent," he muttered. The man behind laughed. He ignored them. It was not a joke. "Are you all alone?" he softly said. The girl did not answer. She could not speak. With her teeth clamped around his flesh. "If you release me," he said, "I will not hurt you." The girl did no such thing, still gathering him as his black blood dripped down her chin. The corner of the king's mouth curled. "Good, you should not trust me." He pried her fingers free, and then carefully extracted the girl from the wreckage as she thrashed. Even in the throes of her violent resistance, she utterly was silent, and it was only once he picked her up. Goddess, she was light, and he could have held her with a single hand. And then he realized how injured she was. Her torn clothes soaked with blood. The sweet scent of permeated his nostrils as he tucked her against his chest. She teetered on the precipice of unconsciousness, but she resisted, her entire body tense. "Rest, little serpent. No harm will come to you." He stroked her cheek. She tried to bite again, but as a spark of magic trailed his fingertips with a whisper of night, came a dreamless sleep, too heavy for even his vicious little thing to fight. "What do you think you want with us to do with her?" one of the soldiers asked. The king strode past. "Nothing. I will take care of her." The beat of silence, though he could not see. The king knew they were exchanging confused glances. "Where?" one of them asked at last. "Home," the king replied. The child slept, one hand clenched tight around the silk fabric of the king's shirt, fighting still in this small way, even in sleep. Home. He would take her home, because the king of Hyad, vampire conqueror of the House of Night, blessed with the goddess Onyxe, one of the most powerful men to ever walk this realm or the next, saw a fragment of himself in this child. And there, right beyond the clenched fist of her palm, something warm, bittersweet stirred in his chest at the sight of her, something more dangerous than hunger. Hundreds of years, historians and scholars would look back at this moment, this decision, one day would topple an empire. What a strange choice, they would whisper. Why would he do this? Why indeed? After all, vampires know better than anyone how important it is to protect their hearts and love. Understand is sharper than any stake.